Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another edition of the show. Normally, friends, a little bit behind the scenes, when I record these episodes, whether it's by myself or I have a guest, it's usually have like this pane of notes, right? Like different topics I want to hit and different questions I want to ask and that sort of thing. And today, I'm kind of going off script because a joke we have all the time here is it's not really episode of this podcast if I don't bring up the Knicks. And as some of you who know me know, I'm a big Knicks fan. I have been since I was a kid. That team just won the title, their first title in 53 years by defeating the San Antonio Spurs in 5 games. So I kind of wanted to take this episode to talk about that, the emotions of that, what it means to me as a fan, probably what it means to other Knicks fans as well, and maybe a quick recap of the series as well. And it's going to be a little bit more stream of consciousness. So if it's a little bit less coherent, a little less organized, you know why. And I want to start by rewinding to when these playoffs started. So I was on the Knicks fan TV post game for the last game of the season when they played Charlotte, and the the whole starting unit was basically benched because they couldn't move up or down in the standings. They were kind of locked into the 3 seed. Mikal Bridges played for like 5 seconds to keep his consecutive game streak alive. And I was on with CK2K on Knicks Fan TV, and we were kind of talking a little bit about the upcoming playoffs and the series against Atlanta. And at the time, I'll admit, throughout this year, and really the bulk of this Knicks tenure, it's felt like a title was out of reach, and whether that's, falling into the media hype around the team, the conversation about Jalen Brunson not being good enough to lead a team to a title, all of that maybe seeped into my mind a little bit. And, I thought they could beat Atlanta. And the next round, presumably at the time, everybody thought it would have been Boston that they would play next. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way. They ended up playing Philly and so on and so forth. And as this postseason went on, the second and third games against Atlanta choppy, and they lose by 1 point each time on CJ McCollum made shots. And, I thought that, that series would have at least one CJ McCollum game, quote unquote. It actually had two, at least two McCollum moments. And from there on, this team went on this crazy run, and they only lost one more game, which was game 3 in the NBA Finals. And they were demolishing teams, right? We saw the closeout game against Atlanta. They were up by 50 at some points. They boat raced both Philly and Cleveland in the closeout game 4s. And, they were just operating at an insane level. And when we got to the finals, a lot of people were just kind of like, well, the East is super weak. The Knicks weren't really playing anyone in that conference because both Boston and Detroit were eliminated before they got to play the Knicks in the second round in conference finals. And, people were lamenting, like, oh, they played a hobbled Philly team and a Cleveland team that ultimately wasn't really serious. And my pushback to that in the moment was, when the series with Atlanta happened, Michael Pena at the Ringer and others were kind of like, hey, I don't think it's that crazy to think that the Hawks could win this series. And they laid out like the wing defenders and how they'd be able to stop the Knicks. Because again, the Knicks had, they won 53 games in the regular season. They were good. But they also had spells where they just looked lost at times, where they were a team, it felt like maybe a little bit too Brunson centric, wasn't getting enough from Bridges at times, that sort of thing. How would this bench really play? So there's a lot of concerns, and Jalen Johnson was an ascending player, and McCollum had playoff experience. So you could see how people would would kind of wonder how well this team would do. And anybody who made predictions was saying, hey, I think the Knicks could be on upset alert. Okay, then you get to the second round. The Sixers beat the Celtics in 7 games the previous round. And everyone's like, hey, this might be the best starting 5 in the East. I think they could be favored to make the NBA Finals, is what some people were saying, right? And, Embiid played in 3 of the 4 games. Maxey and George played in all of the games, and the Knicks made quick work of them. Then they get to the conference finals, and the Cavs are playing them, and, these are the 2 teams at the beginning of the year you thought were gonna be there because in the preseason, everybody thought Boston was gonna take a step back because all the players are traded, and no one really had saw Detroit coming, and everybody thought it'd be Knicks and Cleveland. That's ironically what it ended up being, only they were both the 3 and 4 seeds in the East. And again, it came into like, well, how are the Knicks gonna handle Donovan Mitchell and James Harden? How are they going to guard the front line of Mobley and Allen? All these questions. It's like, hey, Cavs might be the more talented team. Dean Wade was billed as this Brunson stopper, quote unquote, right? And that didn't pan out. And the thing is that the Sixers, the Cavs, when they were beaten by the Knicks, handily swept by this team, they're like, well, we still think we're the better team. Kenny Atkinson said, oh, we're winning these games analytically, which has kind of been turned into a meme. And so when they beat Cleveland, I was floored because I didn't know when the next time this team would make a finals. And I remember when I had Brittany Stewart on talking about the Thunder, and I was just kind of jokingly saying, hey, if we make the finals, let us have 1 game, right? That kind of is the state that a lot of Knicks fans operate under. It's like you want your team to win the title, but at the same time, you've experienced so much heartache that you never really expect it. I think about Jonathan Macri over at Knicks Film School. If you watch his post games throughout the playoff run, he always kind of had this mentality of, well, I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself. I'm not going to go crazy, jump out the window, as CP the franchise would say, right? I'm not going to go super crazy about this team. There's still work to do, because the reason we say that is any Knick fan that's been around since the 90s will tell you that there have been times when we've been up in series or up in games and we thought it was there and it wasn't, right? And there's countless experiences, the Charles Smith shots against the Bulls, the Patrick Ewing finger roll against the Pacers, the Carmelo Anthony block by Roy Hibbert against the Pacers, the Halliburton shot against the Pacers. There's been all of these moments that we thought we were on the precipice and it was just snatched away, right? We thought we were getting Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving snatched away. And so when this team made the finals, I was like, wow, they actually got there. So, and then they're playing the Spurs. And then it started again, where people say they called the West the varsity and the East the JV team, right? And it was just kind of a preconceived notion that whoever won between Oklahoma City and San Antonio would likely win the NBA Finals. A lot of people picking Spurs in 6, Spurs in 5. And when I was doing the preview for Knicks Fan TV, I picked Knicks in 7. Obviously, I'm not going to not pick the Knicks in that situation. It's the team I follow, right? And I thought that they could get it done, but Wembanyama would present challenges, which he did, for the record. And so we go through this finals, and they win the first 2 games in San Antonio. And I'm just like, wow, you could kind of feel it now, right? Like we're heading towards this thing where, history was on the side of the Knicks, where no team who had ever lost the first 2 at home ever came back to win the series. Then they lose game 3, and it's the Trump game is what's going to end up being known as, because it's the first finals game at the Garden since '99. James Dolan, Knicks owner, good friends with Donald Trump, invited him into his suite, in which he fell asleep during an NBA Finals game. That was hilarious. But they come out a little tight. There's a lot of security and weird stuff going on at the Garden that night. People, it's like a TSA line to get into a basketball game. It's kind of ridiculous. And and they end up, falling apart late, losing to Spurs, and I think, okay, now what, right? Then game 4 happens, and it's the OG tipping game. It's the 29-point comeback game, and that's the moment when you go up 3-1 after that. After you're down by 29, the Spurs can't miss in the first half, you win. But not only do you win on a miraculous tip-in from OG Anunoby that if you replayed that play 100 times, doesn't happen again, right? And so then you start to get into this idea that like, hey, you're a team of destiny, right? This is gonna happen, right? So then we get into game 5. It's in San Antonio, and a lot of Knicks fans end up coming in there. There's a little bit of a weird thing where people were getting tickets canceled if they were coming from New York or whatever, but there was like political intervention. The governor of New York got involved, and that decision was reversed or whatever. Anyway, a lot of Knicks fans in there game 5 tasting it, right? Feeling like it could be right there. And the game goes on, and again, Spurs get out to a lead, 16 points or so, and the Knicks come back like they have. Jalen Brunson has one of the all-time closeout games, 45 points on 27 shots. Just incredibly efficient on a night when the team wasn't efficient at all. They shot like 38% from the field. Nobody but him had it. Cat was in foul trouble. Josh Hart didn't do anything offensively. OG was missing shots. Bridges had made a couple, but by and large, it was the Brunson show, right? And then, we're in the final seconds, and, OG at the line, Mikal at the line, it's like, there's like getting a little nervy at the line, and then Wembanyama shoots the 3 at the end. It's a 4-point game at this point, misses. OG gets the rebound, tosses the ball into the sky, and it's their title. They finally did it. And in the moment, I jumped up and down, I hugged my partner, and, I shed tears because this is a team that I've watched since 1994. My first Knick memory is the OJ car chase game in the 94 finals. And then I remember really being locked into the 99 team because of Allen Houston and Latrell Sprewell. Those are like, they're gods in New York City. I always grew up in Queens, and everyone had a Houston or Sprewell jersey. A lot of people had Ewing jerseys, but, that was, he had started to fade at that point, and those were the guys who were kind of taking over, right? And then it was just like years and years and years of misery. There was the one really good Carmelo year, but otherwise, from 2000 to 2021, it was nothing but misery, right? And the thing about Knicks fans is, I think, now I'm probably a little biased in saying this, get that out of the way real quick here. I think we get a bad rap, okay? And, we're kind of looked at as this delusional, obnoxious fan base. And I have a theory where I call it like the 80-20 theory, right? So, like, 80% of people on any given issue, whatever it may be, are generally pretty reasonable. But it's the loudest 10% on either side of the issue that are the loudest that ruin it for those people in the middle, right? So I think you have some Knicks fans that are just a terror. You have, and again, it's a team in the big markets. So you're going to get a lot of people that latch on, which is, I think, what happened towards the finals. Is that people like have any affiliation with New York latched on, grabbed a Knicks jersey, jumped on the bandwagon, and that's fine, whatever. I think like the people who are locked in here, who remember optimism about Frank Ntilikina, who remember optimism about Damian Dotson, Alonzo Trier, who were there for Eddie Curry and Steph Marbury and Jamal Crawford and Zach Randolph, who remember Lance Thomas being this team's captain, who remember optimism about Chris Copeland, like who remember the Bargnani trade, who just lived through all this stuff, and they that was a moment of euphoria, because when you really think about it, if you're like a diehard fan of any team, you're watching the regular season, you're watching 82 games, you get into the playoffs, and you have setback after setback after setback after setback, and I think about even like the Leon Rose era. You get that first disaster year with Fizdale leading into the pandemic. Then you don't really win. You don't win the lottery then. You end up with the 8th pick. You get Obi Toppin and Emmanuel quickly later on. And, then you have this renaissance year from Julius Randle with Tom Thibodeau. And, you make the playoffs, first round, you lose. But hey, that's a building block step in the right direction. Next year, that step is taken away. Evan Fournier, Kemba Walker, it doesn't work, right? You don't make the playoffs. Next summer, you sign Jalen Brunson, and then everything changes, right? You get out of the first round, but lose in the second to the Heat. Then the next year, you get out of the first round, but lose in the second to the Pacers. All right, maybe there's a ceiling on this team. Year after that, you get out of the first round. You beat Boston in the second. Your team, who was engineered to beat this team, you beat them. You think, wow, I'm back in the conference finals. Maybe this can happen now. You get to the Pacers. Halliburton hits that shot in game 1. You blow a lead. And then, you never really recover. You lose that in 6. And then you fire your coach. You fire Thibodeau. And you're wondering, is this team ever going to do this, right? Are they ever really, is this group going to be enough? That's when all the Giannis trade talks start happening. They hire Mike Brown, who a lot of people were dismissive of because of how many people they tried to reach out to get. And this team has an okay regular season, 53 wins, nothing to scoff at, but it's not a 60-win team, right? All the all-time great teams, 60-win teams by and large, right? So you get into the playoffs and you lose those 2 games against Atlanta. Then you start steamrolling these teams. You start blowing teams out. You start dominating. And by the time it's all done and you win, you think about all that you've invested, all this time, energy, and effort into this team, all the hope that you had, I think about friends of mine who are Pistons fans who were, optimistic about Killian Hayes or Hamidou Diallo, or when they drafted Spencer Dinwiddie or whatever. It's just kind of like all these guys that you hope could lead you to this moment. And for a Knicks fan specifically, you also think about the way your team is discussed. I think that, Brunson, when he was signed, no one, myself included, expected this. No one expected him to become an MVP level player. I thought when they picked him up, I was like, okay, he backed up Luka. How good can he really be? I figured, all right, here's a guy who's going to give you 16 points, 8 assists a night, a solid presence at the point guard position. Come to find out, he was much more than that. He's always been much more than that. And none of us saw it coming. Maybe we're blinded by the size or lack thereof. Maybe, we just didn't see the vision. But, Leon Rose, Worldwide West, they saw it. And they get Karl Anthony Towns, they get OG Anunoby, they get Mikal Bridges. They built this team through trade. They didn't build it through the draft like everybody else has. You look around, Oklahoma City, yeah, they traded for Shea. But Chet, J-Dub, all these other great players they have, they acquired them in the draft. The Spurs had 3 consecutive drafts that netted them Wembanyama, Steph Castle, and Dylan Harper. That's the core for their next 5 to 10 years. The Celtics, who won a title. They had Tatum and Brown, who were drafted there. Their 6th man of the year, Peyton Pritchard, drafted. They drafted a lot of these guys. So it's very unusual to get a team from trade. It reminds me of the Pistons that won titles in 04, and in the late 80s. They had Isaiah in the late 80s, but, they acquired a lot of guys. Lambeer acquired, Mahorn acquired, Aguirre was acquired. Then you look at 04, almost all that team was acquired. The only real team that was a player that was drafted of meaning was Tayshaun Prince, Rip Hamilton off the scrap heap. Rasheed Wallace was overlooked. Ben Wallace, undrafted, cut multiple places for being undersized. Chauncey Billups was on his 5th team before he got to Detroit, right? So that's kind of what this felt like. This semblance of talent that just worked, and they saw the vision, and you get to it, and you think about what this team and what basketball means to New York City. New York City has more basketball courts, public access basketball courts, than Chicago and Los Angeles combined. people always talk about what sport resonates in the city, right? When I lived in Detroit, it was called Hockey Town, but they love the NFL, right? The Lions resonate more than anyone else. In New York City, when you think about it, you think about the Yankees. Maybe you think about the Giants. As in terms of teams that won titles and teams that have captivated the city. This is a basketball city, right? The playground game is huge. People love and the thing is, all respect due to the Brooklyn Nets, but the Knicks run that city from an interest perspective, right? Like, whereas in baseball, there's a pretty big division between Mets and Yankees. There's a big division between Giants and Jets, even Islanders and Rangers in the NHL, even MLS. I'm sure there's a pretty big difference between Red Bull and New York City FC. So, but in basketball, that's a Knicks town. I mean, you think about Mike Breen on the call was talking about Julian Champagnie for the Spurs. He was from Brooklyn. And he said something, torching his hometown team. The Nets play in Brooklyn, right? That's give you an idea of how much this team resonates throughout every single borough outward to Long Island, right? So, and we've been told our whole lives that this team is a disaster. It's never going to get out of its own way. It has a shit owner. James Dolan is a terrible owner. You should sell the team. They always are going to let you down. They're never going to be. They're not the Warriors. They're not the Celtics. They're not any of these teams that have built and won titles and whatever that. As a Knicks fan, you need to be prepared for disappointment, for heartbreak. And then this team comes together, and it didn't happen overnight, right? It's been a few years of a build. This is Brunson's 4th year with the team. Cat's 2nd year. Bridges' 2nd year. Anunoby's 3rd year. Like Josh Hart's 3rd year. These are all players that have been through it, and there's some continuity there, and they bring in a new coach and they get it done, right? And it was a euphoria that I hadn't felt. When the Giants won their 2 titles, I was then a Giants fan. I no longer am one for different reasons that I've talked about before. I felt happy, but I didn't have the commitment to the team like I had to the Knicks, right? And like I followed the Giants. I remember when they drafted Eli. Was I watching most games? Yes. But it's not like this Knicks thing, where this is a team that has a core childhood memory for me. This is a team that plays the sport that I care about the most, right? And for years, they were the joke, laughing stock, not good enough, memed into oblivion. When Halliburton did the choke sign thing, that was all over social media. People will always, they made fun of the Julius Randle signing. They made fun of the Brunson signing. They made fun of the OG trade, say like, oh, how could you give up so much to get OG? Or they made fun of the Mikal Bridges trade, so many picks. Now that conversation's dead because it netted a title, right? And in the aftermath, as I was celebrating, and I called my sister, and she's not as dialed into the NBA as I am, but she also loves this team. And she's been watching all along. She was in Chicago during the finals and had to make sure she was watching the game somehow, some way, any way possible. This is the commitment, right? And, we were both crying tears of joy and saying, couldn't believe that they got it done, that it finally happened, that 53 years, I didn't think I would see this in my lifetime. I'm 39 years old, right? I didn't know if I would ever get a chance to see them lift a trophy. It's why I actually cared so much when they won the NBA Cup. I was like, hey, I got to see them lift a trophy. That's pretty cool, right? Obviously, nothing compared to the Larry O'Brien trophy, but it was nice. And then they get this done. And, they do what I and many thought we might never see in our lifetimes. And that's what makes it so special. I always laugh. I think at the World Cup, there was some guy there who was wearing a Yankees hat and a Chiefs jersey. And I was like, what an existence that must be, right? To just latch on to whoever's winning and you're just celebrating all the time. But I think those people miss it. They miss what makes sports great. And what makes sports great is understanding the moment, of understanding the steps to get to a certain spot. If you just jumped on a bandwagon when a team was already winning titles, and then you jump off when they stop winning titles, it's a hollow sort of joy. Like, yeah, in the moment it feels cool, right? But there isn't that long-term reverberating, remember when we won that joy. Like, I'm recording this on a Wednesday. The Knicks won the title like 5 days ago, okay? It still hasn't left me. I'm still on cloud nine. I'm buying championship merch, and it just goes to show you, like, we form these connections, and when you finally overcome it, you really just have this deep gratitude and appreciation, and it makes you wonder why people who don't like sports, why they don't like it. Because it's so poetic, it's so magical when it finally works out. It could be incredibly heartbreaking. It's the ultimate Shakespearean tragedy. But when it works and when it happens, there's nothing like it. It's a euphoria that is so hard to describe and encapsulate to somebody who doesn't get it, somebody who hasn't been through it. And I think about, like, the people who were Warriors fans before Steph Curry. They went through the Baron Davis era. They went through the Chris Mullin Run TMC era and all the garbage that was in between. And they were rewarded with a dynasty. How awesome is that for those people, right? You were the laughingstock of the NBA for a bunch of years, and then all of a sudden you're the gold standard because you get this guy and he gets it. You get this team around him, they get it, and they start winning. And yeah, there's absolutely nothing like it. It really reverberated this team for how they just make us feel, right? You think about this cast of characters. Karl Anthony Towns was called a financial liability, a defensive liability. He turned into an excellent defender on Wemby in the finals for a few games. You think about Jalen Brunson, too small, can't be the 1A, not a superstar. Well, now he's Finals MVP. Now he has a championship. Now he's done with guys like Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, in his prime, Jason Kidd, not when he was with the Mavs, James Harden, what they weren't able to do. Lead a team to a title as the main guy, and you'll never take that away from him because he did it. He did it, and he did it while putting the team on his back. In the finals, he averaged 32 points a game when they were trying to stop him, right? That's the type of thing that we're going to talk about for generations as Knicks fans. We'll be in a bar in 10, 15 years from now. Hey, remember that 06 or that 26 run by Jalen? Remember what he did? Remember the OG tipping? Remember these cat moments? We're going to think about that. We mythologize this stuff because we care so much. And that's the beauty of it. That's the amazing aspect of it. And, I've seen people already trying to discredit it. And the thing about that is they could do that all they want because it doesn't matter. Because come opening night next year, that banner is going to be up at MSG. That trophy is going to be in MSG. These guys are all going to get rings. And, there's like a vindication of it too, because all the old timers, they were there. Walt Frazier at games, Bill Bradley at games from the 70s, right? Bernard King at games. Patrick Ewing, working with the team, is now getting a ring he was denied because he happened to play in the era that featured Michael Jordan. Right? John Starks is there to celebrate. Stephon Marbury, part of a dark period in Knicks history. We bring him back. We embrace him. He's one of us, right? Even guys that are like bit players. Tim Thomas is at games, right? Iman Shumpert is at games, and they're all part of this because I know small market fans probably don't want to hear me say this, but it's different. It's different in New York, okay? It's different winning as a Knick, right? And I think that was the intimidation factor that led to guys like LeBron and Durant not wanting to go there. Yes, the team was a disaster, but also there's some pressure to winning in New York. It's the pressure that Carmelo Anthony signed up. It's the pressure that Julius Randle signed up for. It's the pressure that Jalen Brunson signed up for. knowing that you win here in this city with this insane psychotic fan base, it's just different. It's different than winning in Oklahoma City. It's different than winning in Milwaukee or Denver. Those are all great towns, but it's not this town, right? It's not the city that just lives and breathes this team. You know, I always say, like, the holy trinity of Northeast fandom is New York, Boston, Philly. We're all so similar. We all hate each other because of that, right? And, like, there's a passion, a desire, a commitment to it. It's not like Miami. There's a million other things to do. Not like LA. Like, there are people who love the Lakers, but there's so much to do in LA. A lot of people live and breathe the Knicks or the Yankees or the Mets, you know, they live and breathe the Celtics and the Sixers, you know, and it's just like when you win there, it's different, man. You know, it's just there's a different vibe. And we got to experience that. The parade is about to happen tomorrow. It's gonna be insane. You know, Mom Donnie was on Knicks Fan TV with my guy CP talking about the no bag policy or whatever. It's gonna be insane. There's gonna be a million people there, right? And that's not, you know, hyperbole. That's probably literal, an actual million people, you know, and it's just a beautiful thing. It's what sports gives us. You think about it in the context. The fact that Trump was at the game became a very political thing, that this country is so divided and it's so fractured. But yet we're able to connect on this team that as Knicks fans brought us joy. And that's the beauty of sports, right? That's what makes it so amazing. That's what makes it so incredible is that it can bond us in a way that for a moment, at least for a few hours, we just forget about our differences temporarily and are united in this. You know, you think about fans like Spike Lee, who's been a Knicks season ticket holder since '85, since the day they drafted Patrick Ewing, and hasn't been able to see this. Now, now he can. Ben Stiller, who is in love with this franchise. Mariska Hargitay, who's really close with Jalen and OG, right? And a lot of people make fun of the Celebrity Row thing, the Timothy Chalamet, Kendall Jenner thing. I think it's great. You know, they care. Timothy Chalamet really cares, okay? He skipped the Met Gala to be at a game. Ben Stiller will skip things to be at Knicks games, right? You get a lot of these fans, a lot of these, like, New York-centered people. They live and work in the city. They know what it is. Jon Stewart was at a watch party amongst the people. Jon Stewart's super famous, right? He could go anywhere. He could probably call Dolan and be at a private place to watch these games. No, he's with the people. He understands what it means. He understands that this is different here, man. This is just a basketball culture that loves this team, wants nothing more than to do well. I think about my guys at Knicks Fan TV. They did a 5-hour live stream after they won the title. People just calling in, joyous. Can't believe it happened. They talk about people who died who wouldn't be able to see this, who would have loved this team, right? They talk about passing on this fandom to their kids. It's incredibly generational, right? And I get emotional just thinking about it, that this wasn't handed down to me. I discovered Patrick Ewing in that night in '94, and I've been locked in ever since. My sister's the same. I live in a household with 4 kids, okay? For my partner's 4 kids from a previous relationship. The 2 youngest ask me about the Knicks now. I ask them, "Who's your favorite NBA team?" They don't really watch the NBA. They're young. They're 7, 10 years old. He's like, "Oh, I like the Knicks, obviously." That's being passed down in a way, right? I mm, I talked to my dad throughout the series about this. You know, we were just waxing poetic about this team and what it means to the city, and it's an amazing feeling. There's nothing like it. After they won, friends of mine from back in Michigan hate the Knicks. Can't stand them because of what they did to the Pistons last year in the playoffs. Congratulating me, saying, "I know how much you care about this team." That's beautiful, man. That's just something that I think, and I know I've gone long this episode, and you're probably sick of hearing my voice and hearing me wax poetic about this team. But that matters, right? We're so used to this hot take culture There's like, who's trading for Giannis, who's doing this, all this stuff. It's great to just take a step back here and enjoy it, right? Enjoy this moment of euphoria, this thing that, again, I have been watching this team for 3 decades, and it's all worth it now. All the bad draft picks, all the injuries, all the dumb decisions, all the scandals, all of that led us to this point, to appreciate this point, right? And it's a journey, and I love the journey. And because it led to the happiness that came because you knew what it took to get there, right? This isn't like, like, oh, we're just a microwave dynasty and now we're winning a bunch. No, this isn't like Manchester City in soccer, where they just bought a bunch of players and then all of a sudden became awesome for a decade. This took a lot. This is an unlikely champion with an unlikely superstar. But we're going to hang that rafter forever. It doesn't matter if they don't win another one. We had this year, right? And that's what's important. And I've never been happier to be a Knicks fan. I've always been proud of my team, but, this team is special. We're going to remember them for decades. 16-3 in the playoffs, set the record in point differential. And if you really think about it, if a couple things go a certain way in the NBA moving forward, this title is probably going to get better with age, because if the NBA Cup becomes a bigger deal, then they are remembered as the first team to win the Cup and the NBA Finals in the same year. If Victor Wembanyama turns into the second coming, right, the next great player, where's the team that got him first and beat him, right? So if he rips off 3-4 titles, we'll say, yeah, that's cool. So we got you, right? And that's important. And that's history. And that's why we watch. And that's why we love this game, why we love these teams, right? So congratulations to all my fellow Knicks fans. Congratulations to NBA fans on what was, even only went 5 games, a very competitive NBA Finals. And I love this team. I love this game. And yeah, this is just awesome. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and joining me. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do like this podcast, please consider subscribing and following on your favorite podcast app of choice. You can also follow me on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, where I publish short clips from these episodes. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you for listening for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast.